Sit back, relax. You are about to watch a Peter Gregg video. Something warm, human, and wonderful happens when you watch Peter Gregg.
Hey guys, here we are again. We've had a thing going on where people have asked me to talk about the shutter angle and what is that. Is this another thing? Is this a hoax, or is it true that there is a GH5 fix or a hack for their autofocus system? Well, let's dive into it and see what the heck is going on. Am I giving any shout outs today? You know, I didn't write anybody down, but if I think of one, I'll let you know. All right, here we go. What is a shutter angle? You've seen all these things in videos talking about a focus fix. There goes my hands again, right? Well, the focus should be doing fine now because I'm using a Sony, in case you didn't know. So I'm using a Sony camera, the A7R III, not the 1, not the 2, but the 3. 50 millimeter lens, the wide view, focus detection, which means I can't be using anything to see where I am. So I'm kind of flying blind, but I'm going to make a whole video on that. But I do have a timer going, so I don't go past the 29 minutes. All right, so let's keep things on track so I stay in the 29 minutes because I have a tendency to ramble, maybe just a little teeny weeny bit. All right, so what is shutter angle? Let's start with that. Shutter angle, why does it even exist? Well, you know what a shutter speed is, right? You can actually, on some cameras, you can adjust your shutter speed on the top. You set it to M or S. And you can turn the camera on, which is not on, but I can pretend, right? So I will actually turn the wheel until I get to the shutter speed that I want. So that's a shutter speed. Now that means that the shutter is opening, closing. Wow! How difficult was that to explain? Now we can all go home, right, Jing? Are you going to sit there and just watch me the whole time? Just lay down and relax, chill. All right. So let's talk about a camera. It has a shutter. It opens and it closes. 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 And does a twin lens reflex open and close? Open and close? No. Now let's not get silly, Peter. Okay. So that's a mechanical shutter. Now let's say we're going to make a movie. Let's take an old movie where there's film. How about a very famous one? The Wizard of Oz. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of... You got it. Okay, that's the right one. Okay, so they're going to shoot that. They're going to use film. There's no digital at that time. So what would happen if they're shooting film and every time a new frame comes into the proper spot, it opens the shutter and closes it? Well, how long do you think that shutter is going to last before it runs out of air? It runs out of energy. It runs out of stamina. It's hitting the wall, and finally the shutter breaks. Boom. All right? So they had to invent a system or a way so that you wouldn't destroy your shutters. I mean, you have a couple of retakes and a couple of regular takes, and boom, what do you got? You got a burnt out shutter. So what they designed was a wheel, round circular wheel, like that. Forget the tab here. It's round, right? So that's a wheel, and guess what wheels do? You put them on cars, and you put 4 on, 1 on each corner, and you can go. You put a big engine, you go faster. Okay, and then we start having discussions of what's the 0 to 60 time, what's the braking time, what's the lateral G's, all kinds of stuff on cars that are interesting. But you put it in a camera, okay, and you design a system where you have this wheel, all right, and you have this frame. It's a 35 millimeter frame, like a regular old-fashioned film frame. So you design this system so it advances a frame, and it goes right in the right spot. And you've got this wheel that's a circle that is included in the frame, okay? But the center right here is the spindle, and is off the side. So now the way you control the shutter speed is instead of a shutter opening and closing, you take the wheel and you cut out holes in the wheel. So every time the film advances one, the shutter wheel will go around 1 revolution. So for every single revolution, you're going to have exactly 1 frame pop up into position. Now, the size of the hole in this wheel is going to be your shutter. So they have what they call a 180-degree shutter, and that would be half of the wheel, because the wheel is 360 degrees. It's not a trick question, okay? So half of the wheel is 180. The whole thing is 360. So it goes around, and while it's going around, this comes up, the next thing is in position. Now it goes around again, and next one is in position. So that keeps going on. So now all you've got is a revolving motor. Now, what if you want to change your shutter speed? You take off this wheel and you put a wheel that maybe has a 90-degree angle. So a 90-degree angle is that much. If a 180 is, I'm going to break my finger, okay? 180 is like that much of the wheel, okay? A 90 would be that much of the wheel. So you just increased your shutter speed. But the camera is still the movie camera with the big round things with the film in it, okay? Is still advancing a frame, wheel goes round. Advancing a frame, wheel goes round. And they're in perfect harmony with each other. In fact, they're locked with each other because the same motor that's turning the wheel usually does the frame advance mechanism. So you can't get out of sync. It's always a 180-degree shutter if you've got the 180-degree wheel on there. So you take the 180-degree wheel off, the motor's going to go round and round, but there's nothing to block the film. So they're all going to get exposed, okay, at whatever your frame rate is. So if it's 1/24th of a second, it's going to go up 24 frames per second. If it's 1/30th of a second, it's going to move up 1/30th of a frame per second. So, and the wheel matches the speed. They're in perfect combination. That is what a 180-degree shutter is and what the movie shutter system is. They match with each other perfectly, okay? So that's good news, because now if you pick up a GH5, don't you dare turn off on me. If you pick up a GH5, all right, you have not only the shutter system, you know the shutter system, 124th of a second, 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second, 1/80th of a second, 125. It's the shutter speed. Well, you've got this, but Panasonic wanted to emulate the movie world for people that are into videos. So there, if you look at your dial, or if you look at the numbers on the back, there's no 1/48th of a second on the shutter, right? It's 150 or 130 or 160. That's your shutter speeds. So in order to create the one that matches with the frames per second, Panasonic introduced a electronic version of the movie version of the shutter wheel that's going round. So Panasonic times it perfectly so that every time we have a frame that goes forward, it pops into position. This wheel would go around in the old days, but in the current days, you're going to have a shutter that opens and closes. And then it moves up the next frame and opens and closes. And you do that fast enough and you have, ta-da, you've got moving pictures. And that's what we have here. We're going to come over and see if Jingles is doing okay, because we always do a little bit of a jingle session in our videos. And we're going to say hello to our little jingle bells. And then we're going to come back over here and stand and continue. Okay, so now you have this shutter angle system. Is Panasonic the only one that has it? Yes, at this price range. You would have to go into the thousands of dollars like the Canon C300 or C200 where you actually have the shutter angle. But lo and behold, Panasonic put it in this camera for $2,000 and people are going like, what? What are you talking about? Give me that camera. Just give me 2 of those cameras. Give me a half a dozen of those cameras, because I'm going to make me a movie and I'm going to shoot it with shutter angles. So if you use a shutter angle, let's say at 24 frames per second, you're going to get a 1/48th of a second shutter speed. Even though it's not even on the camera where you can access it, it's going to do it. Wow. So what if you go to a 30p? I shoot in 30p now. A lot of people shoot in 30p. That means that every second a frame is going to advance. I mean, in 30 frames are going to advance for every second, 30 frames per second. And that wheel is going to go round and round in the old mechanical system. But in this brand new one, okay, that we have an electronic system, we are able to actually emulate the shutter angle. So it's going to shoot in synchronization. So what happens with the rest of the camera when that's going on? So you set the camera to, let's say, what the favorite of the movie industry is, and you know what that is? Because this is the number you've been hearing, 180-degree angle. So for the 180-degree angle, it means your shutter is firing in tandem, in perfect synchronization, not tandem, in synchronization with how many frames you're shooting per second. Now, if you are shooting at 30 frames per second, okay, it's not really 30 frames per second, is it? So what does it wind up being for your shutter speed? Okay, so let's move to the 24 frames per second. You're shooting at 24 frames per second, but if you're going to use the old industry standard that was used like the Wizard of Oz, okay, is 180-degree angle. They put this big old wheel on there, and it advances the old 35mm frames, and this wheel's going around one time, every time a frame is advanced. And it goes like that, 24 frames per second. So it's going like, and you get moving pictures, okay? So now, in order to have a 180-degree shutter angle, the shutter on a 24p would be 1/48th of a second. Ta-da! That's not hard. Now, if you go to 30p and you set your camera like most of us have done at 1/60th of a second, what happens? You're shooting at 30 frames per second, okay, and your shutter speed is 1/60th of frames per second. So, but is it? That's where the conundrum comes in. So if you go back to the shutter wheel, if you have a 180-degree shutter, trying to keep it so it's easy and light, okay? So I want to spit it out in the technical terms, but I'm purposely trying to interpret into a more common everyday language. So if you want this to happen and use the shutter system, so you go into the menu and you find where you can switch the whole camera to stop using the seconds like you're used to, like 1/60th, 1/30th, but use a shutter angle. And you're going to turn the wheel until it gets to be 180 degrees, okay? So now when you're at 30p, all right, what are you really shooting? Have you turned the camera on? I don't know if there's a battery in this camera. And look to see if actually, yes, we do have a battery, okay? So if I take a look and I come in here and I go to, okay, I'm going to go to 4K at 1/30th, 30 frames per second, and lo and behold, the sensor output is 29.97. Oh, that's not 30. But the shutter is going to shoot at 30. So what's the difference between 29.97, okay, and 30? There's a little bit of a difference there. So what are we going to do with that little bit of a difference? So for 30p, if I'm going to shoot double the speed, it's going to be 1/60th of a second. But 1/60th of a second is 1/60th of a second. However, the camera's not shooting in 1/60th of a second. It's shooting at 29.97. So it would be 59.94. We've got 6/1000th of a second to deal with here, okay? It sounds like pittance, all right? It sounds like it's nothing. But you know what'll happen? As this circle goes round and round, and this is advancing the frame, they're going to get out of sync. And when it gets out of sync, eventually, when you're watching the movie, you're going to go, hey, what's going on? At first, it's going to look like a little bit of flicker. Then it's going to get worse and worse. And then it's going to be like blank frames, okay? All because of 1/6/100th of a second, okay? 6/100th of a second, to say it properly in English. So what they do is the camera has to make up the difference. And what it does is it, instead of reading for the focusing and everything, it starts reading more frames per second to focus. So it's basically speeding up the camera, but keeping the wheel that's going around in perfect synchronization, okay? So this actually winds up giving us two speeds for the autofocus in the camera. The one where they perfectly match up, this wheel goes round, 1 frame advances. This wheel goes round, 1 frame advances. Now that's in perfect sync, okay? So if it gets out of sync by 600th of a second, just a teeny weeny little bit, okay? If it does that, you're screwed up. So the camera takes care of that by synchronizing it, but now your focus system has got a problem. It's reading the files to focus. So what does it do with the extra ones? What it does is it starts reading more frames. The camera will start reading more frames, and it's going to sound or feel like the camera is actually moving faster. So Panasonic, in their wisdom, say, we know that this problem exists. So they put in something called SynchroSync, where you can adjust the speed of the wheel that's going round. All right, and you can adjust it in relation to the number of frames that the camera is shooting. So what that does is it brings things into alignment again the way you want it, but you can artificially trigger the camera to actually focus on more frames than the 30 frames per second that you're recording. Remember when we started this, we set the camera to 30p, and at 30p it's recording 30 frames per second, but really 29.97, okay? And that little bit of difference is what throws the camera off. So Panasonic has fixed that for us, not only in the GH5, they fixed it for us in the GH4. It's been there all along. The problem is we didn't know how to work it, or a lot of people didn't know how to work it. So somebody comes along and they go like, I have a fix, I have a hack. All you have to do is do this, and it changes the camera, and the focus is fixed. But it's not. It's a hoax. It's like going to one of these, healing services, and they lay their hands on their head and go, be healed. And the guy lays and falls down and then said, give me money. Give me money. I thank you. I fixed it for you. Give me money. And it's not true, because Panasonic has put SynchroSync not only in this camera, okay, but they put SynchroSync in my GH4. Where's my GH4? So it's been in the camera before it, that they allow you to, work the camera, and it's going to have to increase the autofocus number of frames. It's not recording more frames, but it's reading more frames. And when it reads more frames, it looks like the autofocus is actually working better, but it's working the same, but faster. So it's not a fix, and it's not a hack. There's nothing that Panasonic can put in here to fix this hack, okay? If they put a 1/48th of a second speed on your shutter wheel, would that help? No, okay? So the camera still doesn't focus properly. It just doesn't focus properly faster. Now, for many of us, this will make a difference, because it's going to look like the camera is more alive. It's going to look like the camera is more involved, but it's still the same camera. It's still the same processor. And let me prove my point. And the reason I want to prove my point is because it's processor intensive. What if Panasonic put a setting in here that says, okay, always shoot more frames than you need for the focus system, but don't record them. That's what's happening now. It shoots more frames for the focus system, but doesn't record them. We're still recording 30 frames per second if we're in 30p, okay? So what if you go to 60p? It doesn't help. I've tried it. Do you know why it doesn't help? It's because of the processor, the computer power of the camera. Ah, Peter, it's not the computer power of the camera. Really? How about the new Canon M50 that they just came out with? They put 4K in there, and they had to do something about the processor because it's processor intensive. So they took the 4K and they cropped it to almost 3 times. So a 100 millimeter lens is going to be like a 250 or 260 millimeter lens. The crop is greater on the M50 Canon with 4K than it is on this one. That's step one. Step two, they turned off the dual pixel focus in 4K. It's gone. You're back to contrast detection, which is what the GH5 has. But if you go to 1080, it's back again. You get your dual pixel focus in there. Oh, really? That's beginning to sound interesting, Peter. Yeah, because it's processor intensive. How about if we go over to Sony? Okay, I'm on face detection right now with the Sony. This is the A7R Mark III. It's got my face. Nice face at that, huh? Not bad. So if I walk over here, it's going to follow me. I'm going to sit. I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to tell you a little story. I didn't realize Jingles moved. He's at the front of the couch now. Okay, and it follows my face because we're in face detection. You notice how I have the desk back where it was before, so it's more of it is in the picture? It's because we are on face detection now, and this is important. However, in order for face detection to work, I can't use the Wi-Fi. If I use the Wi-Fi, the face detection on the Sony turns off. It goes to regular motion detection, whatever's in motion, and it can be tricked, okay? On the A6500 on the Sony, they only allow it at 24p. So there is something to do with the focusing system and the processor, okay? On all the cameras, not just the Panasonic. So you go like, all right, you take away the Wi-Fi. You know what? I'm going to plug in, in my HDMI port, I'm going to plug in a monitor so I can watch. I know how to beat that camera. If you plug into the HDMI port on this camera, you lose your face detection again. So there's only enough processor power in order for it to function if all these other things are turned off, little by little by little. Same thing's happening with the Panasonic GH5. Okay, the only thing with the Panasonic GH5 is they have a nice good sized body. And they have a faster frames per second focusing ability, but it's still contrast detection. And it's still not a bigger processor. So if they put it to always focus at let's say 60 frames per second, even if you're shooting 24 or shooting 30, I'm guessing, this is only a guess, that the camera's going to overheat. So this autofocus fix is a hoax. It's not true. All it is a setting in your camera. And it's not only been there on the GH5, you could have done it all along. It's on the GH4. You can even do it on that camera, which also has the shutter angle. And it also allows you to go from 180 degree shutter angle to 179 to 150 to 182, okay? But be careful where you go, because now you're going to introduce flicker in relation to your lights. Because there's a reason they use 180 degree shutter angles. And there's a reason why we use 1/60th of a second. I don't even use shutter angles anymore. But if you do, you need to be aware. You can step up the focus system to operate faster. But all that is a setting that Panasonic has already included in the camera. There's no hack. There's no firmware download. All it is you change the setting. And somebody's claiming, okay, give me a camera. I discovered this healing of the GH5 focus system. And it's not. It's the same lousy focus system, okay? It just focuses lousy faster. What the camera needs is it probably needs more processing power, a better heat sink, and a faster, a phase detect type focus system in here. How fast do you think they could make it? If it goes to 160 and it seems to work better, what if you move it up to 120? Is it going to work even better? No, I've tried all that. It still doesn't grab your face. There's not enough processor power in the camera for it to obey its own commands. There'll be a nice, beautiful white box, well, in this case, a yellow box around my face, but the camera doesn't have enough processor power to actually focus on my face. It's using it in other places. So if I walk back and forth, okay, it'll do a little better. I have to say, it'll do a little better if you change the camera and purposely cause it to go into the drive mode where it's using more frames per second to actually focus. All right? But all it is a setting. It should have been presented like, I found a setting where we can make the camera focus a little bit faster. And by focusing a little bit faster, it stays more awake. And you don't notice the mistakes that it's making as often as if we allowed it to focus slower. Now, Panasonic hasn't done that. They may, but my guess is there's not enough processing power in this camera where they can do it. And if there is, it's more likely to overheat. So they could put that in and they could say something like, at your own risk. If the camera overheats, nothing we can do about it, okay? We have it set up properly. So the point of this is that's what the shutter angles are about. They're designed to be in sync with each other, okay? Everything goes up and matches. Now you start changing how, the camera has to read it. It's going to drop down into second gear. And second gear is going to rev up higher, and it's going to actually make the camera more responsive, but you still have contrast detection. You haven't fixed it. You haven't hacked it. You've actually used a setting that's not only available on the GH5, the same exact setting is available on the GH4. So that is what the focus angle, the shutter angle is about. You don't need to do it. Just set your shutter speed at 1/60th of a second for 30p. Set your shutter speed at 1/50th of a second for 24p, and the camera's already doing all of that all by itself. Now, you want to shoot shutter angles? Sure. Somebody showed us. Move it off by 1 from 180 to 179, and boom, you're at that faster focus speed. So whether you're in shutter angle or regular shutter speed that we know of, you can make the camera focus a little bit faster, but still poorly, all right? So my conclusion, my opinion is it's a hoax. It's presented in a way where it's a miracle cure when it isn't. It just isn't. All right, Peter Gregg, Miami, Florida. Leave your comments down below. Be nice, okay? Peter Gregg, Miami, Florida. Thank you to all my new subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Somewhere down there, right? And thanks for watching. Jingles went over there to sit. And that's about it for today. So Peter Gregg, Miami, Florida. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
You have just watched another Peter Gregg video. Something warm, human, and wonderful happens when you watch Peter Gregg. Thank you for watching. Description of all equipment used in this video, plus any notes Peter took while filming, are always placed in the description box, show more box, or down arrow thingy next to the title on mobile apps. Duly noted.